Hey y'all, I'm back finally. We're gonna go through a few chapters here real quick, and this is the emergence of the Roman Empire and rival and schism in the church. And what's this last one over here? I guess that's it. Chapters 19 and 20 here. And once again, if you forgot or just tuning in to this, whatever, uh, the yep, Christian Church Through the Centuries by Earl E. Carnes. Uh, so, anyway, this is chapter 19, The Emergence of the Holy Roman Empire. And, once again, I'm not going to read all of this. If you want to know more, and there's a whole lot that I'm leaving out, you'll have to get the book. This is the ebb and flow in relationships between the church and the state from the year 800 to 1054, chapter 19. And we'll just start off here with the first point. And so the last video was about Charlemagne, and Charlemagne was, whatever you might think about him today, he was a good leader in his time. Uh, so, we owe a lot to his leadership with church history and reading and writing universities, all this kind of stuff. Charlemagne was a brilliant leader. He was a bloody man, but he was a brilliant leader. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Here's chapters 19 and 20. I'll break them down, let you know where the split on those are. I'll mention it. So the weak successors of Charlemagne. So the last video I did was about Charlemagne. You can go back and listen to that. And this is the brilliant imperial structure established by the coronation of Charlemagne by Leo III on Christmas Day of the year 800 did not survive its great founder because the empire had been dependent on his genius. His death was the signal for the beginning of its dissolution. Dissolution. Dissolving, not mentally, but dissolving his empire. Neither his son nor his grandson had the energy and ability that he had, and the splendid Frankish empire broke up rapidly. Then we'll move over here, the rise of feudalism. And there's a whole lot that happens between this first take and what I'm fixing to read, and like I said, you'll have to get the book to read all that. So this is the rise of feudalism. Fragmentation of the great empire that Charlemagne had built up was also hastened by the rise of feudalism. Feudalism, in one form or another, always arises when a central government becomes weak and can no longer exercise effective authority over the areas under its control. And that's just a decline of the city life and trade after the fall of the Roman Empire. It forced people back to the land to make a living. Feudalism had precedents both in Roman and German customs concerning the holding of land and service, and the other chaotic conditions of the 9th century encouraged the rise of feudalistic way of life in Western Europe. It put public power into private hands. So you think about our in the United States, our Constitution, where the people have the power, right? And so you see the split here between Republican and Democrat now in 2025 is the Republicans want less federal power more options for trade and to make money, and that will allow people to build wealth, yes, but it also allows these wealthy people to employ uh, folks and increase in more productivity, which increases more wealth. Whereas the Democrats are doing this thing, like the feudal system started from a decline, right? And then the government starts to take over more and more. And it becomes a feudal system in that you're told where to work and what to do and stuff like that. And it's like it's like communism almost. Not quite the same, but some of the same principles are there. So now we'll get into, and there's a whole lot here that you probably need to go through and read. I'm skipping a bunch of stuff. Uh, so the Viking, Slav, and Magyar invasions, while feudalism was both effect and cause in the decline of the Carolingian Empire. That's the empire of what's his name, Charlemagne. Uh, the Viking, Slav, and Magyar invasions were definite factors in its rapid dissolution. These Vikings, or Northmen, who came from what is now modern Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, were a problem in Western Europe from the late 8th century until the 10th century. Any town or monastery along the coast or on the shores of a navigable river could expect a visit from these bold sea rovers. Many of them finally settled in England, and after much fighting merged with their kinsmen, the Anglo-Saxons, who had come to England earlier. In the process, the fine Christian culture that had been built up in Ireland and England during the Dark Ages was destroyed or set back. Other Vikings settled in Normandy, from whence they came to conquer England under the leadership of William the Conqueror in 1066. And there's a little more information there. You can get the book and read it. Down toward the end of this next section, it says the beginning of the Pope's claim to be and this is the next section. We're not even talking about the Vikings anymore. This is titled "The Importance of the Carolingian Empire," which is Charlemagne's empire. But this is the last little part of it, because I'm not reading all that to you. The beginning of the Pope's claim to be a temporal ruler dated from the grant of the lands in Italy to the Pope by Pippin, the ancestor of Charlemagne, in 756. The Pope, as a temporal as well as a spiritual ruler, made claims on national rulers during the Middle Ages. Claims they would not admit were justified. The impetus given to culture by Charlemagne must be countered as one of the great marks of his empire. His reign was a bright light illuminating by contrast the cultural darkness of the Dark Ages elsewhere in Western Europe. One cannot be impressed with the significance of Charlemagne and his empire for the subsequent history of the church and state in Western Europe. The 10th century rival of the Roman Empire. Even though the empire created by Charlemagne disappeared, the ideal of a universal political empire which Western Europe had inherited from Rome remained. And so you hear that universal political empire, and this is where Protestants, I don't know that they do this so much anymore, but I heard growing up that, the the Pope was the devil or whatever, and it was I was like, this dude's supposed to be a spiritual leader. What is this? But a lot of this stuff, uh, when you learn in history and you see this stuff, and then you compare it to things you read in the Bible, and you'll say, "Oh, okay, that must be that." But we really need to realize that history is history, and a lot of this stuff, if you go back in history, um, you'll see that this stuff has happened many times before. I would not personally call the Pope the devil. There may be some that have been a type of Antichrist, but I would not personally go quite so far as to call the Pope the devil. It depends on what he wants to put into play or whatever, how he serves. We haven't had a good Pope for some time, and I say we. I'm not Roman Catholic, but uh, there hasn't been a real good one in a while, and I know people are going to differ over that. That's okay. You have your opinion. I have mine. I'm Protestant anyway, so my opinion really doesn't matter to you if you are Catholic. Uh, but this idea of the universal political empire, well, what does that remind you of? It looks like Revelation to me, or a part of Revelation anyway. Um, but I know what they're talking about. They're talking about universal church and all this, and having the one man, the Pope, in charge and all this. But uh, this creates a problem that goes down through the centuries and causes the split between the East and the West and all this. And it's this is not the only thing. It wasn't just that. There's many other factors at play. Uh, and so that's all I'm going to read from chapter 19, and we're going on to chapter 20. Still the ebb and flow of relationships between the church and state, 800 to the year 800 to the year 1054. Chapter 20 is the revival and schism in the church. And once again, I'm not reading all this. You'll have to get the book if you want to see more, because there's a whole lot that I left out. So let's see here. Although the Western Church was under the shadow of the Holy Roman Empire during the latter part of the period between 800 and 1054, it experienced an inner renewal that gave it strength to cope with imperial interference. The Eastern Church during this era became conscious of such differences between itself and the Western Church that the period ended with a schism resulting in the creation of the Greek Orthodox Church in the East. Renewal in the West. Although the renewal in the Western Church was not always a renewal of spirit, there was a renewal of strength that helped it in its struggle with the state represented by the German Holy Roman Empire. Several things strengthened the power of the Pope. A. Documents supporting the papacy. The donation of Constantine became the legal ground for the possession of land by the Pope. The greatest grant of land which this document was used to justify was given by Pepin in 756. And remember, if you go back through all the videos, I talked about these people. Okay, that's why I went through a lot of that, because we're building up to modern day, and we have to go through all this history. Okay, so if you don't know who Pepin is, go back. I talked about him. In 865, Pope Nicholas I, who was Pope from 858 to 867, first made use of a collection of decrees of the various pontiffs of Rome. This collection is known as the false decretals or the pseudo-Isidorian creedals. The remarkable document included the donation of Constantine, the real and some forged decrees or decretals of the Pope of Rome from the time of Clement of Rome, and some of the canons of the great councils of the Church. The collection was associated with the name of Isidore of Seville, 560 to 636, head of the Spanish Church during the first part of the 7th century. One cannot be dogmatic about the authorship of the decretals, but it is certain that from the middle of the 9th century they played an important part in the claims of the Roman bishop to supremacy within the church. The donation of Constantine was first exploited in the 8th century, was used to buttress the claims of the popes to land in Italy, but the decretals were appropriated to support the power of the Pope within the Church. The decretals asserted the supremacy of the Pope over all ecclesiastical leaders of the Church and gave any bishop the right to appeal directly to the Pope over the head of its archbishop. The right of the Church to be free from secular control was also claimed. Although it is not likely that any pope created the forgery, many popes made use of the collection to support their claims to the power within the church. The Dictatus of Gregory IX later reinforced these claims. There's a thing here on the conversion of Scandinavia, but I'm not reading that. We'll just say that looks like the credit goes to this guy named Ansgar from 801 to 865, and he converted or was responsible kind of for the conversion. Not that he did it, but he was kind of responsible for Norway, Sweden, Iceland, places like that to come into Christendom. The doctrine of the Mass I thought was very important because that's something very important to Catholics. So the controversy regarding the nature of Christ's presence in communion agitated the Western Church early in the 9th century. Any acceptance of the idea of the Lord's Supper as a sacrifice by the priest was a gain for the power of the papacy because the Pope headed the hierarchy of clergymen who alone had the power to perform this miracle of the Mass. About 831, Pacius Radbertus, from 785 to 860, and I'm probably mispronouncing that guy's name. If I do have any Catholics that listen to this, you please correct me. He was the abbot of the monastery of Corbie near the city of Amiens. Began to teach that by a divine miracle the substance of bread and wine were actually changed into the body and blood of Christ. Although he did not call this change subsubstantiation, his teaching amounted to the same thing. He set forth these views in 831 in a book titled Of the Body and Blood of the Lord. Such a view was bound to strengthen the power of the priest and his superior in the hierarchy, the Pope. The Pope, even though the Roman Church did not officially accept the doctrine of substantiation until 1215, nor fully define it until the Council of Trent in 1545. So you're going from 831 is the first time anyone heard about this. you're the year 831, and then you're looking at the church did not officially accept the doctrine until 1215, and they didn't fully define it until 1545. So this is not something that has always been around. This came, uh, 800 years after Jesus is when that view came about. Before then, it was just communion. It was the Lord's Supper. So transubstantiation is it's old at this point in history, but it's not it's not really biblical. It came over 800 years after Christ. So I mean, it's just something to think about. But we probably do a lot of things now that aren't biblical. So, we need to think about those things. Monastic reform. The monastic reforms carried out by the Cluniac monasteries in the 10th and 11th centuries made a great contribution to the supremacy of the papacy. By the 10th century, the monasteries had become wealthy and corrupt and were badly in need of reform. The earlier ideal of service had been replaced by the ideal of individual salvation, coupled with an easy life in a wealthy monastery. The papacy itself experienced a period of serious decline when Nicholas I and Leo IX serious decline between Nicholas I and Leo IX. The reform movement originating at Cluny was the first of several successive reform movements in the Roman monasticism. It had far-reaching effects. And I'm not going to go through all that. Y'all can go and read about a lot of that. I will read this last little part. The reforming enthusiasm of the Cluniac movement made itself felt in many other areas. The men of Cluny created good monastic schools, and these schools helped to make the Latin the common tongue of the Middle Ages. The movement that resulted in the Crusades being launched against the Muslims in the Holy Land owed much to the monks from Cluniac monasteries. Cluniac monasteries on the frontier of civilization became centers of missionary effort. The order came to an end legally in 1790. So that's wow. That's pretty cool. Capable leaders. Although many of the popes in the era between 800 and 1054 were corrupt or incompetent, there were several able leaders who helped to consolidate the strength of the papacy. Nicholas I, who was pope from 854 to 867, was one of the ablest of these men. Both in writing and practice, he insisted on the supremacy of the pope within the church as one who was responsible for the spiritual welfare of the faithful, and on the supremacy of the pope over temporal rulers in matters of morals or religion. The pseudo-Isidorian creedals were often mentioned by him as a justification for this claim. Nicholas was also successful in upholding the right of a bishop to appeal directly to the Pope. Nicholas even tried to assert his authority over the Patriarch and the Eastern Emperor at Constantinople. Between the pontificates of Nicholas I and Leo IX, there were few good leaders on the papal throne. This was not for a lack of popes, because over 40 popes occupied the episcopal throne in Rome during that period. With the coming of Leo IX, The long era of poor popes between Nicholas I and Leo IX came to an end because Leo and his successors were strong men who were interested in reform along the lines of the Cluniac platform. The Synod of Sutri thus marked the lowest ebb in the power of the papacy in the medieval period. Under Nicholas II, aided by Humbert, who was talked about earlier, it's one of the things I didn't read. Aided by Humbert and the able Hildebrand, who was to become Gregory. Hildebrand became Gregory the Seventh. The election of the Pope was taken out of the hands of the Roman populace and put under the control of the church leaders in the College of Cardinals in 1059. From that time until the papacy reached a peak of power under Innocent III, there was steady advance in the influence of the papacy in European affairs. The church in the East, harassed by the fight to restrain the Muslims from overrunning the Eastern Empire, weakened by the control of its affairs by the emperor of that empire, and frustrated by the theological decline that set in after the great work of John of Damascus, was not in a position to offer much opposition to the rise in temporal as well as spiritual power of the Roman bishop. The growing antagonism between the two sections of the church, which rose out of historic roots, led to a break in 1054. With the break, two divisions of Christian religion appeared, and they have had few official contacts with each other since that time. The origin of the Greek Orthodox Church. The church in the East was never able to be as independent as that in the West because it was under the eye of the emperor and because it had to cope with the Greco-Roman tradition of culture, which was preserved in the East during the time the West was going through the cultural chaos of the Dark Ages. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the church in the West faced no great political rival on the imperial throne and grew stronger as it faced the problems associated with the cultural chaos that surrounded the fall of the empire. Now, this is a section that I find interesting. I think this is the last, well, close to the last section. But these sections that I'm fixing to read, and there's more even in here that I'm not reading, but I am going to read a lot of it because some of this stuff I would look at and be like, I don't know if I would have separated over that. But some of it, hey, I get. So differences and causes for separation of East and West. When Constantine moved his capital to Constantinople in 330, he paved the way for political and finally ecclesiastical separation of the church into the East and West. Theodosius put the administration of the eastern and western areas of the empire under separate heads in 395. With the fall of the Roman Empire in the West in the late 5th century, this division was completely realized. The church in the East was under the jurisdiction of the emperor, but the Pope in Rome was too far away to be brought under his control in the absence of effective political control in the West. The Pope became a temporal as well as spiritual leader in time of crisis. Emperors were almost popes in the East, and in the West, popes were almost emperors. This gave the two churches an entirely different outlook concerning temporal power. The intellectual outlook of the West also differed from that of the East. The Latin West was more inclined to consider practical matters of polity and had little trouble formulating orthodox dogma. Another difference between the two churches concerned celibacy. Marriage of all parish clergy below the rank of bishop was permitted in the East, but in the West the clergy were not allowed to marry. Disputes even arose on some occasions over the wearing of beards. The West stressed the use of Latin, whereas the Eastern churches used Greek. This occasionally led to misunderstanding. Language and culture were also different. The two churches clashed over theological matters in 867. Photius, the patriarch in the East, charged Nicholas I and the church in the West with heresy because the West had the filioque clause in its form of the Nicene Creed. The West accepted the procession of the Holy Spirit from the Son, but this was rejected by the East. Then a series of controversies embittered relations between the East and West. With each dispute, the hostility increased. About the middle of the 2nd century, the problem of when to celebrate Easter had arisen to mar relations between the two sections of the church. Differences of opinion regarding this question always made amicable relations between the two groups difficult. The iconoclastic controversy in the Eastern Church in the 8th and 9th centuries caused many hard feelings. In 726, Leo III, as Emperor of the East, forbade any kneeling before pictures or images, and in 730 he ordered all except the cross removed from the churches and destroyed to limit the power of the monks and to refute Muslim charges of idolatry. This attempt at lay revival in the Eastern Church ran into the vested opposition of the parish and monastic clergy. In the West, the Pope and even Emperor Charlemagne took a stand in favor of the use of visible symbols of divine reality. This interference by the West in the affairs of the Church of the East increased the antagonism between the two areas. The Church in the West continued to use pictures and statues in worship. The Church in the East, however, finally eliminated statues but kept icons, usually pictures of Christ, which were to be accorded reverence but not worship, which belongs to God alone. The Schism of 1054. In 1054, the final controversy revolved around what was apparently a minor matter. I almost said Corleone, like the mob movie, but Michael Cerularius. I don't know. Maybe if I have any Catholics here, maybe you could help me out with that, because I don't know. I'm just reading history, bro. But Michael Cerularius, Patriarch of Constantinople from 1043 to 1059, condemned the church in the West for the use of unleavened bread in the Eucharist. Such use had been a growing practice in the West since the 9th century. Pope Leo IX sent Cardinal Humbert and two other legates, legates, to the East to end the dispute. The differences of opinion widened as the discussions went on. On July 16th, 1054, the Roman legates finally put a decree of excommunication of the patriarch and his followers on the high altar of the Cathedral Church of St. Sophia. The patriarch was not to be outdone, and thereupon in synod he anathematized the Pope of Rome and his followers. The first Great Schism in Christianity broke the unity of the Church. From this time on, the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church went their separate ways. This mutual excommunication was not removed until December 7th, 1965, by Paul VI of Athenagoras. The consequences of the schism. Any ecumenical movement was difficult after the bitter events that separated the church in the East and the church in the West. The modern ecumenical movement aimed at the reunion of the churches of Christendom has had little support from the Roman Catholic Church and from the Greek Orthodox Church. The movement has been primarily a Protestant movement until recently. Neither of the two churches desires an ecumenical church except on its own terms, though the Church of the East has been willing to confer with Protestant churches concerning reunion. Separation shut the church in the East off from many of the vitalizing influences that strengthened the church in the West. Final paragraph. The shock of the rise of Islam in the 7th century and the loss of people and land to the Muslims, coupled with 2 centuries of unrest concerning the use of images, left Christianity in the East to decline. Little change in ritual, polity, or theology has appeared in that church until the present time. Consequently, it has not had the influence on the world that Christianity in the West has had, though in the ancient period of church history it had led in the formulation of theology. So there you go, church splits, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. Because we've got another 1,000 years of history to go till we get to modern times. So y'all come back and join us next time when we'll be talking about the areas between 1054 and 1305, and we'll dig into it. So hope you enjoyed. Hopefully these, if I can make these videos shorter, hopefully you'll tune in. If you like the long ones, let me know. Leave a message or something. Let me know. I don't mind doing the long ones. I prefer them because I can fit more in. But if you like them a little shorter, then let me know that too. So anyway, that was chapters 19 and 20. If you get a notification or something that a video's dropped, just come back in and continue to watch and like, share, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And we'll be back with you later. Peace, love, and chicken grease.